Hi everyone, I hope that you can hear me. It's a bit chaotic here. I'm going to spin the camera around in a minute so you can see. I'm JJ Carpenter, author of The Corner of Her Eye. Thank you so much for joining me for my book launch. You can see my face. I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I have my wine, I'm ready. I hope that you guys have a drink and you're making yourself comfortable too. Let me just quickly show you this amazing venue where we're having my book launch today. Hang on 1 minute. I know that was horrible. I promised you I was going to get better at the live streaming for my book launch. I'm still working on it. So we're not quite ready to start just yet. I have got a couple of little things just for you guys in the live stream to watch until we're ready to go. It won't be long, I promise. And thanks again so much, guys, for joining me.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Is everyone hear me okay? Show of hands at the back. Fantastic. My name's Laura Chillingurian, and I'm very, very excited to be here today with our own JJ Carpenter. Jess, everyone knows Jess, but we'll call her JJ for proceedings today, to launch of her book. It is called The Corner of Her Eye, Book 1, the keeper. It's amazing. We're so excited. Everyone is so excited to be here today. Now, welcome to the Kingston Hotel, and we are on Ngunnawal land, and we'll have a proper traditional welcome to country in a moment. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping first. The toilets at the back, just straight through those curtains. To the left is the women's, to the right is the men's. Wine on the table right near the door, very important. The exits also to the back and off to the right there. And that's about it. Enjoy the next hour. And I'm going to introduce JJ's closest friend, proud First Nations woman, Kath Bombell, for the acknowledgement of country.
Hello everybody, and I'm so very privileged and blessed to be here today. I literally am making it by the skin of my teeth. So I just wanted to take the opportunity for all of us to take a moment and acknowledge where we are in the world today, in this land, and acknowledge the Ngunnawal people and as the traditional custodians, thank you, of the land that we're on today. I don't know if you know much about Ngunnawal country, but Ngunnawal country is a very special spot, and I know that we all call it home now, but one thing to know about it that I find very interesting is that it's a traditional meeting place, but for both men and women's business. So when we're in the valleys, we are doing women's business, and for me, with my friend here, Jess, we're doing some special women's business today. So I am so grateful that I could be here, and I would like to pay all of our respects to the Ngunnawal people and their elders, past, present and emerging, and a special acknowledgement to anyone here in the crowd that is also First Nations people. And if I could just ad lib for a second, I'd like to add one special thing. I don't know if any of you don't know Jess, but one thing I have learned about Jess as a First Nations woman is her very, very deep respect and genuine curiosity for First Nations culture and people, whether it be here in Australia or overseas, where we live at times, and the way she approaches the people and the land that she lives in her day-to-day life, including in the writing of this book, has been so very beautiful. And I hope when you read this book, that will shine through. So thank you and welcome.
Okay, well, I just wanted to mention that I'm very, very, very lucky and very privileged to have been asked by Jess here to narrate the audiobook for The Corner of Her Eye, Book 1, The Keeper. So hope we'll be collaborating on that, so keep an eye out for it. I just want to mention the books are for sale over there at the very end of proceedings today. You're welcome to go and buy yourself a book or buy some merch. We're all modelling online. Okay, order it online. And Jess will be sticking around to obviously sign and have a chat afterwards. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the author of our book, Jessica JJ Carpenter.
I'm a little bit overwhelmed standing up here. I am just so humbled and thankful to all of you for coming today, for everyone who's joining on the live stream as well. We are live streaming. They can only see me, don't worry. And just thank you to Laura and to Kath for that amazing introduction. I am also going to take this moment to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and celebrate. This is Ngunnawal country, and we leave our footprints on their place. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and their connection to land, water and community. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and any other First Nations people who are here with us today. Always was, always will be, Jian Yimara. So, I just wanted to say a few words. I know this is not quite typical of a book launch event for those who've been to them before. They're normally at night in a bookstore, still with wine. But I am now close enough to middle age that all I want to do is buy my book, drink my wine, go home, get into my pajamas and read. So I hope that you appreciate a Saturday afternoon book launch. I am somewhat of a rare sighting after dark these days. I also want to try and keep my speech short. And for those who know me, you'll know that's going to be very hard because I do love to talk. So I've limited myself. There's only two things that I want to do with my speech today. The first one is to say thank you. And the second one is to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book. The thank yous are going to be hard. There are too many people to thank. So I'm going to take this first chance to say, please read the acknowledgements of the book. I'm also going to have a little video playing at the end with some more acknowledgements. Despite that, I'm still going to say thank you to a few people, so you have to sit through that, I'm sorry. I want to start by thanking all of you for coming. Everyone who's on the live stream. My book officially launched today, and I had to turn my phone off because I was overwhelmed by the amount of messages and comments I was receiving. And I want to say I will be looking at all of them and reading all of them, and if Facebook blocks me for being too active again, I'll get to them eventually. But it really does mean so much to me. I have to start by saying a big thank you to my twin sister. She's not here today. She wishes she could be. She's probably watching on the live stream. She is the first person who ever heard me tell my stories. She's heard every single story I've ever written, and she's always been supportive of me through my entire life. I have to say thank you to my husband, who's the one over there, not wearing my merch jumper. So always believing in me as well, and that is really reflected in our two beautiful children, George and Laurie, who are here today as well. My mum, where is she? Is at the back. She came all the way from South Australia. I also want to say a big thank you to some of my close friends, Laura, who came from Sydney, and Katja, who came from Byron Bay. Kath, I've already mentioned. Jem is hiding in the audience, but I want to say thank you to all of you. I can't. I'm already talking too fast. I also have to say a big thank you to those who made the book what it is. The cover artist is a man called Jackson Diosi, and he's a Solomon Islander who is one of the most humble people I've ever met. That cover is just absolutely stunning, and he painted it. And then he put it onto his computer and tweaked it to make it as perfect as he could. And despite that, he still keeps telling me it's not good enough. So it's absolutely wonderful. I'm so pleased I'll be working with him on the other books as well. And then Angela Brown can't be here today. She's my editor. She lives in Los Angeles, so I gave her a pass. And quickly, before I finish the thank yous, I also have to say to everybody who's watching online, Bookstagram is a thing that I discovered this year because I had to get into social media. And there are so many amazing influencers on there who just have a passion for reading and have given me a go without even knowing who I am. The bookstores around Canberra, all of those independent bookstores, shop local if you're not going to buy from me today. Because honestly, I actually think that people who say there's no good left in the world haven't found their book community yet. Okay, why I wrote the book, and this is a question I get asked most of all. And I have a three-part answer for you because I can't stop talking. So, the first part, I had a rough year last year. I don't want to get into it because this is a party, but it was one of those times in my life where it made me question, what am I doing with my life? I do love my job, but what else would I regret if I didn't keep doing, or if I didn't try? And I have been telling stories for as long as I can remember. I wrote my first short story when I was 6 years old. I actually collected them in a shoebox I kept under my bed. I wrote my first novel when I was 12. I got my first publishing offer when I was 14. First literary agent when I was 19. didn't, this is my first published book, I didn't progress for those other reasons. And when my life got really tough, that's what I turned back to. And I'm just so glad that I did. It is my real passion. Second is this book was my therapy. So when you're reading it, don't judge my mental capacity. I poured a lot of my trauma into my characters. It really helped me process it. And in some cases, I was able to give my characters an ending that I wish I could have had. For people who know me, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen to me. I'm one of the most cat's cracking it. I'm one of the most accident-prone people I know. When you read the book, and the blurb is, I didn't expect to die today. And I have had so many near-death experiences, I've actually literally lost count, which sounds inconceivable. I have an autoimmune condition, which means I have pretty nasty anaphylactic reactions every now and then. So I've been in the ICU a few times. I was in a really bad car accident after I got all that under control, and I was like, oh my God, you really can get hit by a bus anytime. I nearly got eaten by a crocodile a couple of years ago. I'll tell anyone that story who wants to hear it sometime. And I had shingles in my brain last year. That was part of what made my year last year so difficult. So again, not wanting to dampen the party, but this is a lot of trauma to process. So I'm hoping it's going to be a good read for all of you. And the question I get asked all the time is, why horror? Why write a horror story? And for me, horror is a safe space for us to process some of the trauma that we face in our lives and some of our fears as well, without actually having to be facing them in our day-to-day lives. So for me, I think horror can actually be beautiful, and I'm not intending to go out and scare the crap out of all of you. I'm not going to swear. I nearly swore on the radio this morning. And the other part of this is I'm at that part of my life where people are starting to die around me. I had 4 friends die in the last couple of years, and I was really getting me down. And then one of the funerals, I saw someone dancing, and I've never seen somebody dance at a funeral before. And it was one of those moments I think that will stick with me forever. And you know, funerals and when someone passes, it's also a celebration of their life as well. And so I hope that some people, when they're reading this book, will find the beauty of a life lived despite the pain of loss. Finally, sorry I'm talking too long, it was really important that this book be set in Australia and tell parts of the Australian story. We have such a beautiful country and such rich history and some of the deepest, furthest reaching supernatural stories on earth. Our First Nations culture is the oldest living culture in the world. But I find that so much of our history is buried or swept under the rug or just lost or forgotten. We kind of think about England when we think about history and ghosts. We don't think about our own country, and that's really sad to me. And so I wanted to highlight Australia in this book. I wanted to highlight parts of the First Nations experience in our colonial history without presuming to tell their stories for them. And I also really wanted to bring some of our personal histories to the fore. I actually have around the venue, I'm a bit of an antique shopper. And I got some old photos and I've put them around. And these are photos of Australians from the 1800s, early 1900s, which ended up in an antique store in Tasmania. And every time I see photos like this, I just think, who is this person? What is their story, and when did they get forgotten? When did their photo end up donated or thrown away? And I actually found this man. That's why I chose this photo I'm holding, because his name is on here, Rhiners, from Renmark, South Australia. And this photo was taken just before he went off to serve in World War I. He survived, came back, lived the rest of his life in South Australia, and died in the 1970s. And when this type of thing comes across my periphery, I have so many ideas in my head, I just can't ignore it. When I was a kid, I promise I won't talk too long, I remember, history wasn't very well taught in schools. And I remember thinking, oh, I feel so sorry for Aboriginal people. all they have is oral history. There's no records. Isn't that so sad? Imagine what's being lost. And now I actually think, isn't it so sad that we don't have more of our own oral stories and oral histories? We've got so many things in dusty archives, and the more I delved into it, the more I realised there's a lot of holes in our history. And that's one of the things that really resonated with me as I was writing this book. Many of those personal stories make Australians who we are and make Australia what it is, and they're hidden, lost, or just gone. So that's why I wrote this book, and why the second book is finished as well. It's with the editor. I'm writing book 3 right now. You're not going to have to wait long, I promise. And I promise as well, there is still so much left to tell of this story. I want to finish with a quote, and it's from one of my new favourite songs. And when I heard it, it just really resonated with my experience writing this book. And it's called Saturn by Sleeping at Last. You taught me the courage of stars before you left, how light carries on endlessly, even after death. With shortness of breath, you explained the infinite, and how rare and beautiful it is to even exist. I couldn't help but ask for you to say it all again. I tried to write it down, but I could never find a pen. But with this book, I found my pen. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Jess. And I just wanted to say that you can talk as long as you like. It's your book. Here for you. Now, as Jess mentioned, not everyone could be here today. So some were brave enough to share a video for the day. So let's have a look. Here's a little video.
Hello everyone, my name is Jackson Diossi. I'm from Solomon Island, currently working in Honiara as a freelance artist. I am 27 years old and I've been doing art since I left high school. I am the illustrator of Jessica's new book, The Corner of Her Eye, and it is my first time doing an international illustration for a book. I am so excited that Jessica reached out to me to be part of her new book. Thank you.
I'm Shani Struthers, the author of 30 Supernatural Thrillers, and I'm just popping on today to say huge congratulations to JJ Carpenter on the launch of her brand new book, From the Corner of Her Eye, Book 1, The Keeper. It's brilliant, it's great, it's a brand new take on the paranormal, and my recommendation is that you get out there and you buy yourself a copy and get stuck in.
Hi Bookstagram. I'm Kim Wells, also known as the Salty Islander, and I am delighted to support JJ Carpenter in her debut novel and to tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Newfoundland, very foggy and misty this time of year in spring, and I've been on Instagram, on Bookstagram, for about 3 years, and seem to be growing my account these days and loving it. With that, I'd like to congratulate JJ Carpenter on her
Excited about, and I'm sure you would possibly introduce you to some of the book. So Jess and I are going to read about 5 minutes each. So we kind of discussed it. I practiced the first half of chapter 1 last night, or yesterday afternoon. I sent her a little message saying, look, I've done it, 5 minutes. I know exactly where it's going to stop, and then you can do another section. And she said, no. I had a look. I'll do the first half of the first chapter. You can do the second half, where the French accent comes into play. So let's begin with The Corner of Her Eye by JJ Carpenter, Book 1, The Keeper. JJ, all yours.
So I'll start with the epigraph. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. And that's an extract from a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The first time Charlie White nearly died, It wasn't anything like Hollywood had promised. There was no tunnel of light. Her life didn't flash before her eyes. Charlie's most prominent and logic thought, as she felt everything dim around her, was, I didn't expect to die today. The second time she nearly died, something came alight inside her. A base, raw need to survive. With the survival instinct came panic, fear, and anger. By now, Charlie had lost track of how many times she'd nearly died. She didn't know when the calm had replaced the panic, hiding the fear and anger deep within her. A chill wind rustled her fine, white-streaked ginger hair, pulling her from her reverie. The dewy grass had started to soak through her jeans, numbing her burning bottom. The wind wound its way inside her oversized woolly jumper, making her shiver. Brushing the grass off her pants, Charlie stood, looking out over the rolling Australian grasslands. Slim, white-barked trees and grey mossy boulders dotted the landscape. She took a deep breath. The air was fresh, enlivening. Here in the native grasslands of rural New South Wales, Charlie felt serene, and she felt alive. It's a good thing I've learned to let go, she sighed, stretching her back as she appreciated the beauty around her. She'd finally had to give up her work, the thing on which she based most of her identity. Well, until this point in her life at least. Now 46 years old, she'd essentially retired and was struggling to figure out who she was out of an office. She'd given everything to her work, never allowing any time for anything else. No partner, no children. Commercial law may sound boring to most people, but to Charlie it had been life. It had been everything. Stubbornly, when her health had first deteriorated, she thought she could pursue a career unchanged, no matter what life or near death threw at her. And she'd been good at her job. Good enough, at least, for a comfortable early retirement, despite not being eligible for any disability support. Not unless she was willing to go through the torture of being declared a sufferer of chronic, crippling anxiety. As Charlie started down the hill, she paused. There it was again in the wind, a sound like deep, guttural, tonal chanting, the type of hum you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. Rationally, she knew it was the sound of wind forcing its way through the rocks and hills. But in her calm, she could almost believe it was music just for her. Charlie's peace was pierced by a dark flash glimpsed from the corner of her eye. A familiar rush of adrenaline sent tingles bursting down her limbs. The wind wasn't her only frequent visitor since she'd moved to the grasslands. Another dark, fleeting visitor always seemed to be right behind her, at the edge of her vision. Sometimes she thought another person must be strolling these forgotten hills, just out of sight. Sometimes she was certain it must be a crow or another dark-coloured bird swooping for mice in the grass. Every time, however, as soon as she turned to look straight on, the shadow slipped away. She spun towards the movement. This time, yet again, nothing was behind her. Charlie physically and mentally shook herself. It was time to go home. You know, potato.
Home was a 3-bedroom cottage, a 10 minutes drive from the nearest neighbour and 30 minutes from Greenfields, the nearest town. Originally built in the 1920s, the house had since been lovingly renovated to a contemporary abode with white walls, polished hardwood floors and modern plumbing. It was everything Charlie needed. The cottage's original California bungalow-style facade with its perfect white windows had been maintained, as had the old veranda that wrapped around one side of the house. This cottage was Charlie's fresh start. Simple, peaceful, quiet, and most important, safe. As she stamped her feet at the front door to loosen the dirt and any final blades of grass, her wall phone trilled. Charlie was one of the few modern Australians who still had a landline. This far from civilization, mobile phone reception was non-existent, and a landline was her only connection to the outside world, at least until she could get her satellite set up. Hello, she breathed, slightly too heavily, ripping the handset from its receiver. Charlie, it's Tess, bonjour. The woman's accented voice crackled slightly on the other end. Just checking in. How's life? Not smited yet? Tess was the only friend who had bothered to keep in regular contact since Charlie had moved from Sydney. Originally from Sceaux in France, near Paris, Tess had been Charlie's instant and closest companion since their chance encounter 10 years earlier. Charlie's law firm had once represented Tess's employer. a big-time department store. They caught each other sneaking cigarettes on company time behind the dumpster. As the legal case had dragged on, those daily cigarette breaks had been the highlight of Charlie's day. The smiting inside joke was their weekly vet-a-vent, or back and forth for the English speakers like Charlie. Every conversation over the past 6 months had started the same way, ever since Charlie had joked that the big man upstairs must be trying to smite her, but doing a half-assed job of it. Nope, no smiting here, Charlie laughed. Bien. Charlie could picture Tess smiling into her mobile phone. How's the new place? I keep forgetting to ask each time I call. Good, Charlie mimicked her friend, though in English. You know, peaceful, cozy, quiet. And peanut-free? Yes, Charlie chuckled, not a whiff of a peanut since I moved in. The Oxford Language Dictionary entry recited itself in Charlie's head. Peanut, the oval seed of a tropical South American plant, often roasted and salted and eaten as a snack. Small, common, and in Charlie's case, absolutely deadly. Now, even the smell of a roasted peanut would send her into an anaphylactic shock. Adult onset allergies, while relatively uncommon, were generally more of a nuisance than life-changing. That's what the medical professionals had frequently reminded her, at least. Yet, within 5 years, Charlie had gone from a regular peanut butter-loving middle-aged woman to a recluse. Now she couldn't even walk through a food court, grocery store, Sunday farmer's market, or public park for fear of a small South American oval seed. Has the paint smell settled? Weeks ago, Charlie replied, looking around her large living room. The kitchen to her right was on the small side, but modern, and gleamed cleanly. A fireplace took pride of place in the centre of the living room, with comfortable leather lounges and armchairs surrounding it. There were only 2 matching cushions on the couch and no throws in sight. Charlie's style was classic and minimalist. The only artwork on the walls was a woman standing in the middle of an empty field in the rain. Though she bought it years earlier, it somehow seemed to encapsulate how her life had turned out for her. To her left was her desk. No TV, but what good was a TV that couldn't connect to anything anyway? Ahead of her was the door to the long hallway from which her bedrooms and sewing room were reached. If you were to enter the hallway, only bright white walls would greet you. The only family photo Charlie owned was a silver-framed picture of her parents, leaning lonely on her bedside table. Over her shoulder, through the open front doors, she saw the old gum trees waving slightly in the wind and the hills sloping upwards beyond. Good. Well, maybe I'll finally visit you then, Tess said wistfully. You're keeping well otherwise? Not bored? Not mad yet? She was never one to mince her words. Not yet, Charlie smiled. I'm still walking every day, which is easier now that spring is finally here. It's nice to be able to roam outside as long as I like. I'm still sewing too. I finally sold my first pair of culottes. Haha, wonderful. I wish you didn't live so far, darling. It wasn't the first or the last time Charlie would hear this. All of her former colleagues, family, what was left of them, and friends had tried to convince her not to move so far and so remote. Allergies could be managed in suburbia. Hospitals were closer. Company was crucial. But with Charlie's feeling of calm acceptance, she reasoned it was better this way. This way, with her own piece of Australia, she could have some freedom. She could walk as long as she pleased, and above all, she could expand her bubble of safety. In the cities and towns, she never knew when the slightest whiff of someone's lunch would send her spiralling into anaphylaxis and into the closest hospital bed. Here, there was just wide open space and clean, fresh air. She didn't feel so confined, so claustrophobic. When I'm old and decrepit, I'll move in with you, Charlie said. For now, keep calling me as often as you can. And get your ass down here and visit me. That guest bedroom has been empty since I moved in. Tessa's laughter was momentarily interrupted by a loud bang. Oh, enculé. Leon is home, I take it? Charlie asked wryly. Yes, darling, Tess answered. Leon was Tessa's 27-year-old son who still lived at home. He'd been the reason Tess had dropped out of university to follow her Australian lover halfway across the world, a torrid romance that had ended violently some 10 years later when her lover and his fists had finally pushed Tess too far. This was not long after Charlie and Tess had first met, and it had been Charlie's couch she'd slept on until she found her feet. I promise I'll call again soon. Adieu, mon chéri, Charlotte. Je t'aimerai pour toujours. Goodbye, Therese. The phone clicked as Tess disconnected, and Charlie sighed as she put the handset back into the receiver with a dull clack. I promise I'll love you too, forever too. As the wind picked up outside, Charlie focused on its deep sound, feeling that familiar sense of calm wrapping around her. Once again, a dark shadow flicked at the corner of her eye. Charlie turned, slowly this time, expecting to see her empty lounge, as she always did. She gasped as, instead of melting away this time, the shadow formed itself into the shimmering outline of a tall, distinctly human figure. Despite its near translucence and her difficulty focusing her eyes on this stranger, some details stood out clearly. The pointed white loafers on its feet, its white pressed suit, the white top hat perched wonkily on its head. Fuck! Well, I hope you enjoyed just a little taste of The Corner of Her Eye, Book 1, The Keeper. I know I was enthralled after that first chapter. I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, goosebumps. Here we go. Yeah, why loafers? Why the pointed? Yeah, there were a lot of questions. And speaking of which, I thought we should do a little Q&A. And I just want to preface this by saying that I've known Jess since she was a little baby. I remember holding her like this. And my sister and her mum are pretty much best friends, right? We've known each other for a very long time. And so Jess and Sarah were a big part of my life when I was at uni, living here in Canberra. Yes, I did help babysit sometimes. That's how she remembers me. And so I was absolutely excited to, asked to be involved with this. And I wanted to open up the questions to everyone. So if you have any questions, please sort of have a think about what you'd like to ask. I'll ask Jess a few questions and then throw it out to the room and see if we can get some more information from her. But there's a lot I want to know. Firstly, I know that you used to love writing when you were little, and you talked about that in your speech. And I was having a chat with Sylvia about it. She remembers reading some of your early books and your early novels and things that you wrote. But what made you fall in love with writing? Can you remember that far back?
So I will try not to talk too long. It's actually one of my first memories is writing and telling stories. And I was one of those really annoying kids who could read and write before I went to school. And one of my first memories, I'm 4 years old, and my mum's smirking because she knows where this is going. And I would get a piece of paper, and I knew the alphabet, and I would write all these random strings of letters together. And I'd go and bug her and be like, Mum, have I spelled a word? And I'd do this for hours. And I remember one time I spelled aeroplane, except for one letter. And it's a core memory now. It really just stuck in my head. And then you should have seen me when I went to school. I was the bane of my teacher's existence as well. It was year 1. I'd read every single book they had in my classroom. And my teacher, I remember her going, oh, and rolling her eyes. And she gave me a copy of Babe. And she had it on her. It was the first novel I ever read. And I could see the look in her eyes like, just try this one. And I came back a few days later and I finished reading it. And I found it so boring because I was like 6 or 7 years old. And she quizzed me because she didn't believe I'd written this. And it was when I was 12. I know all the English teachers out there hope that this is a story their students are going to tell about them one day, but we had to write a story in year 7. And I wrote a story, but I couldn't finish it. I think I wrote 8,000 words, and I handed this assignment in. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I just couldn't finish writing. I just couldn't stop. The story wasn't finished. And he said, why don't you finish it? Why don't you write a novel? And it's like a light bulb went on in my head. I'd never had anyone tell me I could do that before. And that's when I started writing and when I wrote my first novel. And this is the first one that's been published. It's actually the 6th novel I've written. I wish I could tell you when it started, but it's just always been a part of me.
You're a busy woman. When did you find the time?
I don't sleep. That's why I'm always so cranky and red in the face and drinking coffee. So I actually wrote this book so fast. When I first started writing, I was the science fiction fantasy nerd. I loved it. And so it was a really long, heavy world-building books. And they would take me like a year each to write at least. And this one I wrote in 6 weeks. I didn't finish it in 6 weeks. I wrote it and then I had to start editing, which took a lot longer. And it poured out of me, but it was in the evenings. I'm not a morning person. So I'd finish with work, I'd get home and my husband would pick up the slack around the house so I could write. Yeah, evenings. Who needs sleep?
Absolutely. Now, it's interesting because there's the old saying or the old cliche, I guess, write what you know. You touched on this in your speech about, that sort of aspect of how this was the trauma that you went through and how this was therapy and the stories that you wanted to tell. But how did you go about researching it? Because it is very thoroughly researched.
Yes, so that's the history angle. And I promise one of my main motives was making history not boring because I want people, younger people especially, to read it and enjoy it. Not too young. I mean, the first chapter is always a scene setter, but I've been told it does get a bit scary by chapter 12, so I'm just warning you now.
Like mother.
So I do write what I know, and actually as we were reading and I was hearing you, I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to think the main character's me. It's not. So the main character, I've drawn inspiration from a lot of the women that I know, but I do make her go through my trauma. And when it came to the history, so book 1 is set in an old station homestead in Australia. It follows Charlie White, but it also looks back at Australia through the Depression in the 1930s. And for me, when I was telling history, I said I wanted to highlight the hidden parts, and book 1 brings out some of that. For example, I'm sure lots of people I've talked to don't know that it was First Nations people that opened Australia's most profitable stock routes to us. And if you had a station homestead with Indigenous Australian workers, it would sell for twice as much as one without. So those little bits and pieces I weave through. I'm rambling. I'm on long service leave and I am loving it because I'm spending all my spare time going to old bookstores, going to libraries, reading. I went to Newcastle the other day and I held an 1800s newspaper in my hand. I was worried I was going to break it, but and I talked to a local historian. I've talked to all of these Australians who have stories either of themselves or of their grandparents or memoirs, journals. Give it all to me because I'm really enjoying it. Sorry, that was long.
Just before I throw open to questions, have you ever had any ghost experiences yourself?
I always get asked this one. I was on the radio this morning and I told Emma, I always get asked if I believe in ghosts. She's like, I won't ask you. I knew I'd have to answer it today. I know, I'll tell you again. So I always say, yes, I believe in ghosts. But then I follow up quickly with, but what is a ghost? And that's a question I don't have an answer to. I definitely have had experiences that I can't explain. And it started when I was a kid. Again, from as early as I can remember, weird things like waking up and there'd be a grey person sitting on the edge of my bed. It's kind of scary. Seeing women looking at me through the windows of my parents' church. And I didn't know what that was when I was a kid. So there's things that I can't explain. There's things that enough other people out there can't explain. And when I was writing this book, I didn't want to say, this is exactly how it is. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be something that no matter what you believe, it can resonate with you. And it's just one way of interpreting a question that a lot of us have and a lot of us don't have the answer to.
Well, from what I hear from Simon, this place is haunted. So it's good to sort of be somewhere with a little bit of history. I would love to see any hands if anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask. Oh, there's a little one over there first. Can you yell it out loud?
How scary does it get by
So I'll repeat for anyone who can hear. How scary does it get by chapter 12? What are you scared of? So for me, I didn't think the book was scary until my mum read it. And then if you're scared of ghosts, or if you're scared of being alone in the dark, or maybe not being alone in the dark, then you might find bits of this book creepy. I recommend 16 years and older, but for anyone younger, I do have a friend who's reading it with her daughter, who's 13 years old. So parental discretion is advised.
And there's a bit of swearing in French and English. And I'm sorry if I butchered the French accent, anyone.
Laughing at I know what that meant.
Mo and I Google translated it earlier. Trust me, do it. At the back there.
How do you decide to name a person? Does that make sense?
It does. So the question is, how do I decide what to name a person, the character? And these are real names. So when I'm writing my fictional science fiction, I just made up whatever name I felt like. But this is an Australian story, and I actually was looking at the most common names from the periods that my characters would have been born. It sounds really boring. And they're not named after anyone I know, because I don't want people to know which parts of them I was putting into the characters.
You mentioned that you wrote science fiction when you were a child. I remember reading fantasy novels, which freaked me out because half the time I couldn't remember the characters in the first chapter to the second chapter. What made you change your genre to scary books?
So the question is, why did I change genres from fantasy and science fiction to horror? And my sister asked me this as well, and she's the one who read all my books. And she hates me when I give this answer because she's like, you make sure people don't know that I am not scared of your stories. So, Sarah, if you're watching, see, not scared. She would read my books, and every now and then she'd give me advice, and she said, this part of your book was too sad or too dark. You have to change it. And I'd go in and I'd change it, and then she'd come back and be like, you made it worse. So I suppose I've always had that little streak there. And I answered this question the other day too. And the way that Ian on the radio answered was like, oh, so you grew up then. You went from writing fantasy to writing history. And I suppose when I was a kid, I thought history was so boring, especially not history, Australian history, because I didn't understand how deep our history is. And I was scared of ghosts. So partly it's everything I've been through and processing it. Partly it, I suppose, is I've had a lot of more lived experience now, and this is one way to process it. And then just on a personal level, I love a good mystery story. And for me, there's nothing better than a ghost story, because not only are you solving how did they die, but why are they still here? And so that's hopefully a little bit of an insight. I don't have the full answer myself.
Fabulous insight. Any other hands? I would love to know. Just see that. I would love to know. It's a question I'm always curious about with authors. The writing process. What comes to you first? Is it the storyline? Is it a particular character that you want to develop? Do you already know how it's going to end?
So it will depend what author you ask. I get my ideas from everywhere. The other day I saw a house covered in pigeons and I was like, oh, pigeon house. So did you ever see a book called Pigeon House? It could be the most random thing. Or the other day I saw a man coming off the plane and he had dark suit, dark hat, dark face, mask, and these glowing spectacles. I'm like, oh, he's interesting. So I get ideas all the time, and I'll be researching one book and I'll read something and I'll go, oh, I really want to write that book now. So I have to write all of my ideas down. And I'm a little bit of, there's a meme that I really like. And it's a guy smoking a cigarette in front of one of those criminal boards of all the red string. And that's my book writing process. So it's a little bit mad. And honestly, if I'm really excited, I will spew out the first few chapters before I get into the planning mode. But I am also a little OCD, so I know what's going to happen in each chapter as I'm writing the book. By the end, then I'm editing, making sure there's no plot holes, finessing. And with this series, I absolutely know how it's all going to end, how it's coming together at the end, and what happens in each book. And there's other ideas too, but I won't talk about them now, because then we'll never get out of here.
Well, we're about 5 minutes away from wrapping up, but any other questions? Because I do have more for Jess.
Jess, did you draw any inspiration from you've had an unusual amount of time in the Pacific Islands, Vanuatu, in your youth, and of course recently in the Solomons. I know the book is very much Australia focused, but is there anything of the Pacific?
So for those who didn't hear the question, was there anything of the Pacific in this book? And so just for those who don't know me, I have spent a lot of my time living and working in the South Pacific. Vanuatu first, where I taught at a rural school, and I've done a lot of work in Fiji, which is how I know Tim. I was just living at Solomon Islands. I've lived there twice. And for me, the people there have such attachment to their history and to their own culture and the stories that they tell. So the influence that I had on me, and I suppose on my writing, is Pacific Islanders are storytellers. It doesn't matter about the truth, it matters about the story. And that really did influence me as I was writing. It's one of the things that made me think more about my own culture, my own history. I have no idea who my great-great-grandparents are. It's lost to me. But if you talk to a Pacific Islander, they can go all the way back 500 years often. So, yeah, I suppose it's not so much the story itself as it is why the story is important and why we need to be telling stories.
I guess that goes back to what Kath was talking about with the oral histories being shared. It's just incredible. It reminded me of, on the front of your book, there's a quote there from Karen Warren, who is a fellow Canberra author. And I remember interviewing Karen years ago, and what you were discussing about being inspired from strange little things that you might see. She loves going into, her favourite thing to do is to walk into an antique shop and just pick something up, and she'll see a story in it, and she'll want to tell a story. She collects all these strange things. She's very odd. Sorry, Karen, if you're watching. But I was curious to know what you've learnt in this whole thing, throughout this whole, writing, getting it all edited up, promoting it, and publishing this all yourself. What have you learnt out of it? What have been the biggest challenges?
I've learned too much to talk about now. It's a lot of hard work. I got an Instagram account. They're watching now, so long as I got that right. The marketing sucks. I'm just going to put that out there. I love every part of writing except the marketing. I could just keep talking, so I'm actually going to focus on the most important thing I learned from this whole process. Just one thing I'm going to summarise, and that just if there's something that you want to do or something that you're passionate about, there's no time like now, and there's never going to be a perfect time, and just do it. And all these years that I spent not writing because I was too busy, I didn't have time, it wasn't true. I could have made the time, and honestly, what I've learned from this is I could do it, and I just had to do it. Just do it. Just do it. There you go.
One last call out for any other questions. Yes, hello.
I wanted to ask, because you said this was your sixth book.
Yes.
And so why was this one different from the other five? And what made you want to choose this?
So that was a great question. What made book number 6 different from all the other books, and why did I want to publish this one? So the first 3 books I wrote, I did get a publishing offer on, didn't progress. Book number 5 had an agent for, didn't progress, and it was always because I wasn't prioritising that first. It wasn't the thing that was important. And so when I wrote this book, I wasn't writing it for me anymore, or not just for me. I was writing it to tell the story, and that's a big difference. So when I started writing, you often hear authors say, and you say, oh, who you write the book for? Myself. It's just for me. But when you're telling a story, it is never just an individual thing. And so this was the first book that I was using to share something with everyone who I am so grateful to for even thinking about picking up a copy. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Well, I think I'm going to wrap things up. I just wanted to ask one final question. Whoever is buying a book today or is going to start buying them from the local Canberra bookshops, which are amazing and do support local Canberra authors, it is a wonderful place to live. They're going to get to the end of book 1 and they know you've written book 2. I guess the question is, when will that one be out?
So you guys, I'll tell you, I haven't announced it yet. I'll do it anyway. It's with my editor right now. I told myself, if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to do it. And I'm putting a lot of energy in. My plan is to have the first 3 books come out this year. So book 1 today, book 1 today. Book 3 is being edited now and it should be ready towards the end of July, or book 2. And book 3 before the end of the year. So you can follow me, I'm going to do a plug, on Instagram and Facebook. And I promise I'm going to be spamming you all with lots of information. It's JJ Carpenter, author.
And do keep an eye out. I think we'll try to get the audiobook out in about a month. That will be the plan. So thank you all so much for coming today. And thank you to our wonderful author, JJ Carpenter. Thank you. I know you're going to love it. I'm just going to wrap things up by saying that you can move through to the bar area if you'd like to stay.
No,
not yet. Oh, that's at 4. Sorry, stay. Okay, I didn't read that part. Okay, yes, you do it.
Keep drinking. There's wine at the back. There's also now food at the back.
There we go.
I am going to be signing books over there. And we do have the acknowledgements video to play as well.
Okay.
And I don't know what else I've written.
Yeah, that's what you've got.
Okay.
It's all good. Thank you. I read the wrong bit. So yeah, there'll be a short little acknowledgement video and enjoy yourselves and come and say hi to Jess and get your book signed. Thank you.
The shortness of breath, you explain the infinite, how rare and beautiful it is to even exist. I couldn't help but ask you to see it all again. The shortness of breath